started. CKGM, everyone. Welcome to another Union Hall cast. Today I'm here with my good friend Gandalf. I do know his real name, but he goes by his pseudonym online. Gandalf and I work closely together on Union and Auro, but for this cast, I'll take the role of an interviewer that's not that familiar yet with Auro, so we can kind of have a natural trajectory and explain the product in full. Before we do that, I think Gandalf might be nice to know a bit of your background because you've worked obviously for a while in crypto in various roles, and also on the side, I'm not sure if I can share, but you also do some volunteering work that I'm quite impressed by. That's kind of completely outside of crypto, not something we normally see in tech.
Sure. So thanks for having me on the call. I've been in the space for almost 10 years now. I've worked on numerous different projects, from layer 1 blockchains to NFT launch pads to LSTs. This is my first LST that I've launched, LST being liquid stake token. And I have worked with numerous different organizations and entities that has really been quite an eye-opener. I've worked with the NBA, I've worked with Legendary Pictures, with Mike Tyson, Steve Aoki. I was editor-in-chief for somebody called Scott Melker, the Wolf of Wall Streets. I've been a feature journalist and a news journalist for Cointelegraph, and been referenced in Harvard. And I've really had a very exciting time in the space, and I don't think I could ever go back out of crypto, to be honest. And outside of my work with crypto, I also do volunteer firefighting, and it came out of my interest of wanting to give back a little bit to the community. Where I live, there's a very strong community vibe. And anybody who has been to Australia knows that bushfires are a very big and real thing every year. And so I decided to get involved with our local brigade, and now I help out. We do more than just firefighting. We do we attend car accidents, we attend rescues. Our brigade specifically focuses on medical response as well. So any what are called code zeros, which is essentially cardiac arrests or respiratory arrests, basically when somebody's dying or struggling in that regard, we tend to get a call out because we can often respond faster than ambulances. Sometimes it could be up to a half-hour wait for an ambulance, and that's a long time to wait if you're not breathing. So we'll tend to get out the door fairly quickly for that, and just provide that early response. So
I feel we could go into that for 45 minutes, but I'm going to just restrict myself to one question on that. Do you guys have those insanely cool claws of life where you can like rip open a car, or
So we're not a rescue brigade, which means we don't actually have all the tools or technically qualified. So we will normally have a rescue brigade respond in parallel to us whenever we have trapped people. But we do have a couple of the smaller jaws of life to really get in there. And there are times when it really comes down to, is this person going to survive waiting for the rescue brigade to arrive? And there's been incidences where we've basically just had to drag them out any way we can, through a window, through windscreen, because they're not in a good way, and we need to get them some life-saving support. And so you just do what you can. There's your protocol, and then there's you do what you do.
Makes sense. So that lines up quite nicely with stressful weeks in crypto, and then in the weekends,
crypto's the break for me.
It's the break, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can deal with all the stress. So previously, before basically founding Auro, you already worked at Bitcoin LSTs, right? Might be a good segue into like why Auro. What did you kind of identify working in the space itself, right? Seeing how those systems work and what didn't really work and what was necessary.
Yep. So I've been involved with Bitcoin LSTs for probably close to 4 years now. and right from the ideation stage to launching it and developing out the ecosystem and growing it. So the full life cycle of an LST. And it started out with ETH LSTs. So this was even before Bitcoin LSTs was a thing, and then launching the Bitcoin LST. And with ETH, you've got Eigenlayer and you've got proof of stake, and we had the we had the understanding that ETH staking is quite a good yield bearing product, or it's a good source of yield, but we wanted to turn it into a liquid staked product. And so that's where LSDs came in. And from there, we then essentially, Eigenlayer had the idea of, hey, we can utilize these funds more efficiently in a restaked concept. And so that's essentially when Eigenlayer was born. And one of the things that we explored was, how can we do this with Bitcoin? And that's when Babylon came out, and the Babylon founder was actually one of the investors in the first Bitcoin LSD that we worked on, or I worked on with the team. But even then, there were still some core challenges that we were not able to get past, and none of the LSDs have been able to tackle this. And two of those key challenges are fragmented liquidity and sustainable and scalable yield. And with fragmented liquidity, what I mean there is, previously there was no core source of yield that was sustainable and scalable. So it meant that the underlying reserves or the underlying Bitcoin either had to chase for different yield sources, which we see in some of the LSTs, or we have to take the LST token itself and chase other yield sources. But either case, it ends up being that you keep moving this TVL from chain to chain, from ecosystem to ecosystem. And every time you do that, you fragment it and you lose out in liquidity, you lose out in composability there. And so that is something that I know was a huge challenge for us. We had the opportunity to develop out these ecosystems, but we basically just got stopped dead in our tracks because we couldn't support from a liquidity perspective. So that was a major challenge. And then the second one is kind of going even deeper into that, which is the sustainable and scalable yield. And Eigenlayer, Babylon, Fat Layer, all of these
Eigenlayer too, right? Isn't like really sustainable in a sense.
Correct.
I think most of the yield still comes from ETH staking, and they're now, I see they try to do a lot in AI, right? To try to find like the Eigen cloud to find revenue from that side, but it's still like feels quite slow overall compared to the original promise.
Yeah, that's right. It's all of these have underperformed. The concepts are great, but in reality, they're a few years ahead of their time, in the sense that they've got the concept, but they don't have the utilization. They don't have the services being built on top of them. Eigenlayer and Babylon both launched without having any services or AVSs live. And even though that some of those have started now, they're paying their yield in their own token, their own asset. And so how do you quantify the value of that, or how do you value those assets when they're so unstable, and you don't know when they're going to be released, you don't know what liquidity they're going to have? It's just a nightmare. And so that was where I was looking at, what can we do to bring LSTs into the next generation, the next phase. And that was when we got talking, and we both had a very similar mindset on that. And we decided that Auro was going to be that new product that could tackle those challenges head on. With Union being a bit of the core infrastructure, we can tackle that fragmented liquidity. And then by focusing on Bitcoin, we were able to be really, really creative in our core yield source and not focus on staking or restaking in its traditional sense, but really break out of that mold and find work from the bottom up. we need that core yield, we need that sustainable yield, and then how can we take that and how can we turn it into a liquid product that meets the needs of all these LPs and all these Bitcoin holders? And that's how Auro was developed out.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I'm still like on the fence if like within crypto we should even classify regular staking as like a proper yield source, because I think like the complex economic dynamics underneath make it more so like you have to participate because it's inflationary, and you need to account for the fact that a token kind of goes down in value proportional to, right, what the staking rewards are going to be, especially since outside of like having the capital and like going long on an asset, really staking like doesn't require additional like work to be put in, right? Like sure, it secures the network, but in the case of ETH, does it matter that we have like 10,000 nodes versus 5,000 nodes, right? And running a node is it's quite trivial. So in the end, everyone will kind of just stake anyway and sell off their rewards. So when we initially spoke, I was like very keen to have like a different yield source, right? Something that's not related to any of these dynamics. I guess like when you said like we were able to get creative, it also means like we're effectively challenged in a sense, right? Because we didn't have the easy option like you have with some of the other LSTs where you go, well, like as a base layer, we'll just take that inflation that's coming from a chain, right? Like it's relatively simple to write a staking contract, but we have to actually like figure out where yield comes from. So I learned a lot actually working with you to figure out like the yield landscape. What can you do with Bitcoin? Maybe nice for viewers, like before we go into like actual Auro mechanism, like previously, if you had prep Bitcoin, LBTC, whatever, like where were you able to like derive yields from? What like your funds with $1 billion in Bitcoin, like what were previously your options?
So the underlying Bitcoin, there was only one. I mean, before Babylon, there was no yield source, essentially. And then Babylon launched about, I don't know, a year and a half ago, something like that, maybe two years ago. Lost track of time now. And even then, the yield source was kind of a future yield source. So there really wasn't any option there. The ability to generate yield on top of your LST, so with LBTC, Solve BTC, UniBTC, etc., it really came down to the existing DeFi protocols and whether they were going to integrate those assets, either as a way to loop through lending and borrowing, or via Pendle in essentially trading the yield component and the principal component separately, or through any other yield optimization or yield aggregator. But at the end of the day, that's just simple DeFi and using an LST instead of a normal stablecoin or a normal Bitcoin. And so why would you do that? It doesn't make sense why you'd use a less liquid token when you could have the more liquid ones generating just as much yield.
Exactly. And then I think the other one that I learned about is what a lot of more, I would say, like centralized like financial products offer, right? Which is effectively you lend your Bitcoin to a market maker, to a trader, and they're gonna trade with it and hopefully turn a profit on that. And usually, if I'm correct, they will frame this as delta neutral strategy, right? Which means that they effectively will hedge their trading with perps, right? So they'll buy longs and shorts, and that way, if Bitcoin like fluctuates in price, then the underlying principle isn't affected, and the yield shouldn't be affected. Which initially I thought like, okay, pretty smart, right? Like makes sense. But then ever since the 10th of October, we kind of now know that that can actually be very risky. And I think some of these products did explode indeed, right? And turned out to not be delta neutral. For listeners, like delta neutral, basically in this case just means that no matter like the swing of the underlying product, in this case the price of Bitcoin, the like product you build on top will like function the same. So these market makers will advertise if Bitcoin goes down from 100k to 80k, then like the yield isn't going to be affected. We're not going to lose Bitcoin. So in the end, you're still going to get like 1 Bitcoin back plus your yields, no matter what happens. But the problem, of course, is if they get liquidated on their perps because there's a sudden massive price drop, right, then they do lose that 1 Bitcoin, and then they have to tell their LPs, like, we made a mistake, we have a boo-boo here, the money's gone. And it's good to see that the industry now realizes that it's actually quite a risky strategy overall. That it's not something that you can just wire funds to traders and then hope for the best. So yeah, with Auro, we had to figure out we wanted a product that's like completely different from this, right? That stands outside from having exposure to any of these kind of black swan event financial risks when the entire crypto market collapses.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And the taking that further, it was to be a yield source that was, it's kind of the underlying yield source for Bitcoin that all of these others can be built on top of. And I mentioned to you, I think a couple of times on our very first chats about this, that I don't want to touch any of the yield sources that are existing in the DeFi, not only for the reasons that you've just mentioned, but because it then allows us to be complementary to all the existing products out there. Whereas if we just try and repeat the same strategies that are already live, we're basically just being a copycat, and we're not. We then have to compete with the TVL, the liquidity that's there. We have to then try and figure out how we're going to work with all of these much more mature projects that essentially have a much better position than us, and that was not what we wanted to do.
Yeah, and kind of like you described initially too, like there has to be a reason to go into a LST over when you have the original asset, right?
Yep.
And with a lot of these current products, sure, like you might get like an airdrop farm, right, or get like the token of the LST itself. But outside of that, there's not that much reason to go from having wrapped BTC on chain to having one of these LST tokens on chain. And so I think indeed, like that's why we wanted to have like a different yield source, because then there's suddenly like a push for people to say, I need to like get rid of my regular Bitcoin, my wrapped Bitcoin, and get into this alternative asset because I want exposure.
Yep.
So we kind of arrived on, right, was like thinking, okay, what's the like one other way to get more Bitcoin that doesn't like involve trading, or I don't know. You see some people who put their Bitcoin like a lending protocol and then get stables, and then they get like yield on the stable and then buy more Bitcoin with that. That's also like risky in the case of black swan events where loans get liquidated. So we didn't want exposure to that. So we kind of had like one thing left that like no one had tried yet.
Or they tried, but they couldn't crack.
Exactly, yeah. Which was related to basically obtaining Bitcoin from the source, right? Like effectively doing mining and using that as the underlying yield source to actually have a way to obtain Bitcoin in an actual way, right? Not in a way where it's zero sum effectively, but to have a product that's positive sum in the end. Maybe I know we don't want to like leak all the alpha for how the actual core system works, but maybe it might be good for people to get a little bit of a rundown for like how does Auro work, what's kind of happening under the hood here.
Yeah, for sure. So it's on the face of it, it's quite a simple product. Essentially, we use Bitcoin to finance the purchase in a rent-to-own model of Bitcoin miners, and we use the yield generated from those Bitcoin miners to essentially source the yield that we pay the stakers. However, underneath, it's quite complex, and it needs to be that complex because for any yield source, essentially, there are going to be risks involved. And we're not going to sugarcoat it saying that there is zero risk involved in Bitcoin mining. Everybody knows that there are different risks in Bitcoin mining than you'll see on chain. But we've developed Auro in quite a unique manner to really mitigate and reduce a lot of those risks. And that I haven't even started talking about how we're doing this, and I've said risk I don't know how many times in this call, but that is the core of Auro. Was designed to be a low risk yield strategy that everybody can build on. And we focused on our, so it's a non-custodial solution. We don't take custody of any of the funds. We use other partners, Kobo, BitGo, Cactus, Amber, hex trust, etc., to manage all of that. We're focused on being ETF grade, and the proof is in the pudding in the sense of the sort of partners that we've been able to secure already. But let me get back to how Auro works. We've got two products, a highly liquid one and a high or a boosted yield one. The highly liquid one has just a fairly stable yield of around 3 to 5%, and that one is focused on the being fully backed by Bitcoin. We use it as a portion of the Bitcoin as collateral to finance Bitcoin miners, and we do it in a very unique way where the hardware of the Bitcoin miners is actually what's held as collateral as well, and that's what's used in the case of a liquidation. So we don't actually increase any liquidation or put any onus back on the stakers for this. So we are able to protect their principal very, very securely in this regard, and the yield is generated in Bitcoin. It's a Bitcoin denominated yield, meaning 1 Bitcoin in, 1.1 out. And what that allows us to do is that allows us to separate or isolate this model in terms of Bitcoin, and it then allows us to not have to worry too much around the price of Bitcoin. If it drops or if it goes up, it doesn't matter because the entire loop is all denominated in Bitcoin. The other product, which is the really boosted one, is without going into detail, it basically, if we have the funds locked for around 12 months, we can actually generate an additional yield that boosts that up to around 15%. Now that is just the initial yield. We will be dropping that lower, but we want to really kickstart this off with a bang. And the interest we've received was actually a lot more than we anticipated. We got a Bitcoin ETF that was quite interested in using us. We've got tier 1 exchanges. We've got L2 foundations. We were literally about to sign some MOUs with some L2s in the next coming days. We've got some DATs. We've got treasuries. We've got multiple high net worth individuals. We've got Bitcoin miners who want to put their Bitcoin with us. We've got everybody we've spoken to has been super, super interested in this, and they're all, I think there's a fatigue of the same old strategy and concepts when it comes to DeFi, and being able to mature this industry in a way that we've been able to do with Auro is something that is definitely needed and desperately being looked for. We've even got a number of the Bitcoin LSTs. I won't share too much, but let's just say that everybody we're speaking to is very, very interested with us. Watch this space.
Yeah. And so what I like, for me, was a big unlock, in my understanding, because people watching know that I'm a programmer by my background. So I like the L1 design, cryptography and stuff a lot more. And I'm like less versed in like financial products. So initially I thought, how can this work? Right? Like, does it make sense? But for me, the real unlock came when you described that this almost resembles like a real estate purchase, right? Because when there's a new skyscraper being built in New York, like the value of the skyscraper is going to be 2 billion, but the real estate developer doesn't actually put in 2 billion, right? Because it would be impossible to finance that way. Instead, what happens is they have a loan, and as they start building what's already been built, right, the ground that they buy, the initial construction kind of goes into the loan itself, right? Because the value of the plot goes up as the construction progresses. And so in the end, when they reach an end state and the skyscraper is built, effectively that skyscraper is worth 2 billion, and originally they put in 200 million themselves. So the loan is over collateralized. It's secured by 2.2 billion, while they only need to pay off 2 billion back again. And that way you get like really good capital efficiency, right? Because now suddenly in the construction case, you effectively put in 200 million and they generated a yield of 10x on this, right? And there's like loan terms, interest, etc. But roughly like they managed to leverage it this way. And Auro kind of does the same. Like if if you think about it, if you classify Auro, it's really an RWA, right? Because there's a real world asset. There's like physical mining like facilities. There's like machines out there generating value. And Auro kind of reflects that in a sense on chain, right? And for that yield. So it's actually like a productive asset, and there's a productive
We're
category.
essentially trading the mining yield essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, so that to me, then that's when I was like, aha, like I get what you've been cooking. It fully clicks for me now. This actually makes a lot of sense to do it in this way. So for me, that was the big magic moment, and to see it all come together.
Yeah, there was one more thing I was just going to add just to that, which I meant to add before, but I forgot. And that was, you know how you'd mentioned with the off-chain yield strategies, how they're exposed to the price fluctuation, etc., with price crashes and not being able to close down their positions at speed. One of the things that Auro makes Auro, I mean, there's a lot of things that make Auro unique, but in that regard is the value of the miners, like you're saying with the real estate, is what is held as collateral for the financing. And the miners, they don't drop in value 20, 30% overnight. I mean, Bitcoin's dropped what, 30 odd percent in the last few weeks? Miners have dropped maybe 5 to 10% in value over that period. So not only do you have RWA or real world assets that are collateralized here, in addition to the Bitcoin, but you also have a much slower moving or more stable asset. And that allows you to have the time, and you don't need much time. You only need a day or two in order to liquidate anything or refinance yourself. But that's because if you look at whenever liquidations occur, it's always during those flash crashes.
Yeah.
It's never during the 1 or 2 week downwards trend or anything like that. So we are essentially able to completely avoid those risks and mitigate those risks with having the miners as the collateral.
Yeah, I think this also ties in a bit to our strategy with the initial interest, right? Because it's not just that we're just getting random mining contracts, but we actually go into strategic partnerships with our mining partners who know like our like 1 year roadmap, 2 year roadmap, 3 year roadmap, etc. So you have less of a risk. Like in DeFi, obviously, the moment an oracle says like the price has dropped, anyone can like liquidate you on Aave, right? So it's a very I don't want to say predatory, but very competitive in a sense. Like on chain, there's not a nice guy who says, this poor little protocol, like they're trying hard and probably tomorrow this loan is going to be fine. No, like a liquidation bot immediately goes, nice, like money to be obtained here. Let's liquidate them and take this. But in our model, you effectively don't have that, right? There's contracts that say, well, right, like even if it drops below value, you get a month, right, to refinance, etc. In that month, you've earned additional Bitcoin as well. So that's also a thing. If you're holding like wrapped Bitcoin on chain and you effectively go down in value, then if Bitcoin doesn't go up, you need to top up with your own money, right? There's no like additional funds coming in. The loan isn't auto repaying itself. So your LTV ratio never improves.
Yep. And another thing with Bitcoin mining is just on the LTV ratio, not only do you have the hardware as collateral that you can just essentially sell off in worst case scenarios, but something that is done in hardware backed finance is you literally just redirect the Bitcoin that's mined to the finance partner until the LTV is back at a reasonable position. And so it's literally saying, hey, we're just going to promise you the rest of our Bitcoin until we've got this back into a reasonable position. And once that happens, you just redirect the Bitcoin yield back to yourself again. So it's such a forgiving concept and product.
Yeah. For our listeners here, I'm breaking up, I think. Can you hear me, Gandalf?
I think you're better now. Yep.
Okay. Just let me know if I break up again, and then I'll switch to different Wi-Fi. So yeah, that like makes the product on itself like extremely interesting for, I guess, more traditional firms as well, right? A lot of the initial interest we had wasn't necessarily from DeFi, because in DeFi people often want to, I mean, be locked for maybe 2 weeks, right? That's kind of what they're used to.
Correct. Yeah.
But in the TradFi world, being like buying a contract that expires in a year is very normal. And actually, like if you put your money into hedge funds, like you can only exit once a year, and if you like don't exit in that week that you're allowed to, then you're just locked in for another 12 months. So this locked product as well actually is a lot more institutional in a sense, right? Like very predictable in how it's modeled,
Yep.
which was interesting to see that basically there we barely had to do selling, right? It was just like they were like, aha, makes a lot of sense, makes a lot more sense than a complex system of restaking chains and yield being earned in alternative tokens, right? I buy a 12-month
Even the banks
contract
are
at
getting
the
it.
end of it. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that for me was like really cool to see as well, that it aligns much better with what financial institution wants.
Yep. Yeah, and just to add to that, the bridging of the traditional finance, I think, is what is needed in maturing the DeFi world. The DeFi world is all like it works well, but it's really experimental and it's very fragile. As we're seeing, like Babylon, billions of dollars was put into Babylon, all on something that was literally just an experiment. And you could say that it was successful as far as an experiment goes, but not as a traditional financial product. And so I think being able to merge those two together, and this is again, Auro was designed specifically for the traditional financial. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel it's always negative to say, well, like this experiment fails, etc., and to go too deep into that. But I think like the takeaway is with these experiments, it's easy to get like initial TVL and capital because those are the risky parties that like want to basically get exposure to what might be the next big thing. But for like LSTs, actually what we want is a scalable product. So something where if you start off with 500 million, like technically the next month you could scale up to 50 billion just as easily, right? And that's because that allows you to figure out your model once and then keep scaling that model over and over. And I think what
Exactly.
Babylon and Eigenlayer in a sense succeeded with was finding that initial capital that was willing to take a bet on an experiment, to take the risk, to get exposure to the next big thing. But they never found a model that could scale, right? And at some point, you could argue even that they had too much TVL in a sense, right?
It's a
Where
very
like
common
if they
argument.
just had, yeah, if they just had like 500 million TVL, the yield would have been high enough, and everyone would say like great product, right? It's working well. I'm getting the yield I was promised. Now it's time to figure out a way to scale this. And so potentially like they scaled too early and then diluted the yield too much. And then in the end, kind of everyone leaves the table feeling a little bit burnt.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. Babylon and Eigenlayer were definitely not failures in any way, shape, or form. It's just they proved, like you said, that there is a way for, or there is a market for these sort of products. And now with Auro, we're saying, all right, we know there's a market. How are we going to make this in a way that actually works for what people need and what people want, taking it to that next step?
Yeah, exactly. And so let's go into like the harder questions on this, because if any viewers listening to this, then they're going to say this sounds a bit too good to be true, right? So what are like really the risks with Oro? The first thing I could come up with is like it's a nice product that doesn't care about black swan events in crypto, but on the other end you have exposure to global energy prices, for example, right? So that's one trade-off that you're making here.
Absolutely. So Bitcoin mining has always been controversial because of the energy consumption and energy usage. And I think, generally speaking, that conversation has become a bit more realistic in the sense that people understand now a lot of the energy that's being used isn't it's not like we're creating a whole bunch of coal power plants to facilitate this. It's rather existing energy that is already there that we're just utilizing. But the cost of energy and the cost of running it is probably the biggest operational expense when it comes to Auro. And well, it is by far. And there are a few ways to handle that. Most of these deals that we do they have locked in contracts for 1, 2, 3, even 5 years. One of our partners offered 5 years for their energy costs. And the second mitigation strategy is essentially to diversify so that you're not reliant on any one jurisdiction, not only from a political sense, but also from a regulatory and the cost of energy as well. And so Auro will be diversifying into around, I think we've got about 8 to 10 countries across the world that we're going to be holding our mining equipment with. But then taking this further, the most efficient way is to actually run mining farms ourselves. And that carries its own risks then, but it also allows much stronger control over the energy prices. I mean, you set up a wind and solar farm and put your mining equipment there, you're essentially getting free electricity. Just the management and the running costs is what you need to pay. And so that's, I guess, the long-term goal, but it needs to be done in a very scalable manner that doesn't increase the risk in a way that's unsatisfactory. And we are essentially, right from the get-go, I mentioned we've got an ETF involved. We've got some banks. We're going to the hardest customers, essentially, the slowest moving ones, the most cautious ones, because if we can cater to them, then everybody else is going to be okay. And so we are focused on that risk. It all comes back to that risk. How do we mitigate the risk of the energy costs rising? How do we mitigate the risk of political pressure and changing regulations? How do we mitigate the risk of a partner going under or changing their terms or not paying back what's owed or things like that? I think that is as long as we can manage the risk, we know that the yield is there. With Bitcoin mining, it's been around for 10 plus years. Everybody knows that it generates Bitcoin, and it's a long-term play. You generate Bitcoin now, and hello again. You generate Bitcoin now, all good. And in a couple of years' time, that's Bitcoin that you might have only been making 1 or 2% profit on. It's actually made a much larger amount of profit because the value has gone up, and it's that long-term play, and those are the customers that we think this is really going to work with. But in addition, it also works with the DeFi players. It also works with the LSTs. There really isn't a customer that this doesn't work with, and this is one of the things that I know we haven't really talked about. But as far as the competitors of Auro, all the potential competitors, like there's nobody that's doing this right now, and all the ones that can do this, we're already partnering with. And we've had this conversation a few times, and we said, look, we need to make sure we're being aware of the landscape and who else is doing this sort of thing. And it's such a unique model and such an agile and flexible model that it literally works with everybody. There is no real competitor that we can't tailor this to work complementary for. And I think that's really, really important, being able to understand that and not just focus on how can we get the best yield out there? How can we scale as fast as we can? Because that's not going to work. We've seen that tried, and it just doesn't work. And so focusing on the risks, focusing on working with the existing players in the landscape, working on working with the ones that are experts in their field and not trying to reinvent the wheel. I think that's Auro's success.
Yeah, and so Auro finds itself in quite a like obviously everyone loves it when we're actually in a bull market, right? And everything's only going up. But I guess the great thing for Auro is since Bitcoin miners have now dropped in price, it's actually really beneficial because you lock in those loans at the lower price, right? Which as Bitcoin goes up in value, allows you to refinance and acquire more miners and basically benefit from the healthy LTV ratio that you get because you got in when it was low. So it's actually a very opportune moment. I know, like in the final couple minutes of this recording, I know initially we also spoke about some more I would say degenerate and sci-fi ideas, but technically you can scale Auro's model to alternative models that are not Bitcoin mining as well, right? For example, finance AI mining or mine alternative assets like Zcash and such. So there's a lot of opportunity to basically expand this model as well to get like additional yield sources.
Yeah, we have probably, I'd say, a 3 to 5 year roadmap already outlined. There's half a dozen products that we've already got set, ready to, well, not ready, but ready to start planning and developing. And really, we just can't be building fast enough. Once we get Auro launched and the Bitcoin LSE out, there's not going to be any rest for us for the next, I don't know how many years, that's for sure. One of the other things that I think is really interesting to touch on as well is virgin Bitcoin. And that's a concept that I think a lot of people haven't heard before, but is really unique to Auro. And virgin Bitcoin is essentially Bitcoin that hasn't touched any smart contracts. It hasn't touched any pools. It hasn't gone into an address that has other Bitcoin in there. It's completely untainted, pure, and innocent, so to speak. And virgin Bitcoin trades at a premium of up to 5%. And the only way to get virgin Bitcoin is straight from the source of Bitcoin rewards and Bitcoin mining. And Auro is the only Bitcoin yield-bearing product that generates virgin Bitcoin. And so even, let's say, absolute worst case scenario, there's no profit being made. There's still value being generated in that the Bitcoin that we're generating is now virgin Bitcoin. And this is really, really important, especially for those traditional financial institutions and the traditional players who have a high degree of compliance and regulatory responsibility to ensure that the yield that they're generating is coming from clean sources. And that's, again, where Auro shines.
And so just to explain, like I'm five, basically virgin Bitcoin is more valuable because with regular Bitcoin, there's always the risk that in that Bitcoin's life cycle, it has been part of a hack or has been laundered somehow, right? So you kind of need to like trace it all the way back to when that Bitcoin was mined to figure out if you're allowed to hold it or not, right? And with virgin Bitcoin, it's really simple, right? You don't need to do any auditing. You don't need to figure out this trail whatsoever. You just immediately know I can hold this. I'm not sure like if it's possible with Bitcoin's protocol. It probably is. Like even if you receive it from an exchange, you can probably like figure out the audit trail. But because mixers exist, etc., it's like always a bit risky. You need like a technological partner and pay for that to figure it out. So,
and who's willing to do that if you can just do it with Auro and just not have to worry about it? Like it just makes more sense.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So just to conclude this podcast, like, hey, thanks for coming on and giving me another rundown to make me even more bullish. What's for the viewers and the listeners the next thing to look out for? What's the next big moment?
Sure. So we've got a big announcement planned for Bitcoin Mina, which is early December. We've got a number of our partners already lined up. I think this announcement is going to be really exciting. In addition to that, we have quite a unique, I don't want to call it a loyalty program, but it's a VIP program. And even though this isn't necessarily for all the viewers, I think it's a taste of what's to come. And right now, this VIP program, it has special. I'm trying to not give away details, but it has special value and we're talking value of 6-7 figures per membership year, and you don't have to pay for this. You get this for free. But there's just so much value that's generated by this concept that just being involved, and I've said this to the partners as well, essentially my job is to make sure that all of our partners, all of our LPs, all of our customers make as much money as they can. Because as long as they make as much money as they can and they're happy, Auro is going to be successful. And there's enough to go around for everybody. And I think this VIP program is going to be a bit of a taster of just how generous this product and how exciting it can be, even for the individuals. And even though this VIP program is extremely exclusive, it will be branched out and expanded to be able to, with some of our partners, work and be open to the everyday user as well.
Yeah, and I think that aligns a little bit with your launch strategy as well, right? Where even though like this product will become accessible to all users, initially this product is basically only for power users with, I guess people need to think capital requirements being at least like 1 million. And so far from our conversations, like you'd even be on the low side there and need to like
Absolutely.
10 to 100x your input before being able to stake with Auro. So Bitcoin Mina is the big announce moment. And so if you're listening in and you think I need like a slice of this pie, I've got Bitcoin and my funds need exposure to this, or I'm in this business, this makes sense, I want to be part of it, they should basically add you on Twitter and try to find you at the conference over there, right?
I mean, you can just ask for Gandalf, and hopefully there won't be too many Gandalfs over there.
Exactly. Yeah, do the magic incantation. The eagle will bring you to the parties that need you.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Gandalf. Appreciate you taking the time. And for our listeners, we'll be back next week again. Probably next week a bit more technical. So for the engineers listening in, but for the finance pros this time, I hope we gave you a bit of a taste of what we've been cooking. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Carol.